Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Stretch Professor, and I just want to do a real quick video about Riot's proposed preseason changes for 2021 in terms of items. So we don't have a ton of information yet, but I just figured I would take this opportunity just to talk about what they're saying in this post, and then also to give you my thoughts on items, what I think are some of the potential cool things about items, what are some of the weaknesses of the current item system, and then I have some proposed changes that I hope Riot will do. Now, they haven't suggested many of these, they've hinted at some of them, but I just want to show you what a revamped system might look like if it was done, in my opinion, a little bit better. So I'm just going to give you my take on it, what I would like to see, and then I've got some examples of how they might change some current items, and then a couple of items that they might add that I think could fill some gaps, and also some very familiar old items that they removed that I think they could change around and rebalance to bring them back into the game. So I have several examples, and I'll talk about what those mean sort of as we go here. Okay, so Riot's goals, their main thing they said they 100% want to do is to make the shop more clear and make it easier for people to navigate. I think this is pretty simple to do. I mean, they already have a custom item page that you can do, and they can just kind of clean up the visuals and make it a little more honey, can you just take her in the other room? Thank you. But anyway, so I think they can do that. That'll make it easier for kind of newer players or players who don't think that critically about items. They don't really like know which items they're supposed to get, stuff like that. I mean, anything like that that's going to be good is going to be helpful. So they can do that for sure, and that's easy. That doesn't require any balancing. That's just client updates just to make stuff visually good. Now, other things, they think that they have good consequences for early game items. They think they're high impact, so that's good. I agree. Items are satisfying to earn and use. Somewhat. I mean, they give it good, and I kind of agree with that. I think that sometimes they are, but I think that there are lots of items that are just like not optimized very well, that are kind of bloated with weird stats, that the champions who get those items don't necessarily always want those stats. So, like, Trinity's a great example of just a whole bunch of random stats that not every champion who gets Trinity wants all of those. Like, they don't all want mana. They don't all necessarily want a lot of attack speed, so it's not, like, a super clear item. And Ginsu's is another one, Ginsu's Rageblade, that just has all kinds of, like, just weird stuff. It's got, like, Spell Pin on it, attack speed, AP, AD, like, stacking attack speed. It's got all these really weird things when most people, or most champions that want that item, want it for the phantom hit, right? They want it for the passive. They want it so you can double proc your on-hit abilities. That's the cool thing. That's what makes it unique. That's what people want. So I think they could readjust some of these items to make it more clear what you're actually trying to do with that item. And that's kind of what they're talking about here. Reactive item choices and game-to-game variants. So getting different items, getting different reactive items in different games. There are some classes that have this done really well, so I think, and we'll talk about this here in a second, I think that Lethality and Enchanters have this done really well, and Tanks to a lesser extent have lots of options and they can adapt to different games. But there are certain champion classes, particularly some of the hard carry classes that require very expensive items like 80 carries, some mages, and things like that. They don't have that much wiggle room with their build. They kind of have to get the same items every game. So I think they could add in some better items for those classes, some reactive items. Items that augment your champion's playstyle, so items that, once again, feel unique for a certain champion. Now, you have to be careful with this one because you don't want to make items that are just like super OP on a handful of champs or super good, but they aren't really used elsewhere. I think we saw that with Spear of Shojin, which they tried out last year. It was like really OP on Renekton and Jax, but just no one else used it. And they eventually had to get rid of that item. Ginsu's is similar. It has a wider base. There are lots of champs that would like the on attack. You've got your, obviously, like your Master Yi, but then your Vayne, your Kog'Maw, your Varus with on-hit builds. So it's a little bit broader, but it's still kind of narrow. So you have to be very careful in designing items that are going to be good for a bunch of different types of champs and will not just make one champ OP. Or like a handful of champs OP. Okay, so overall, I think that they kind of have identified a lot of the problems, so we'll just have to see if they can fix it. Other than that, they don't really give out that much. They want a very clear contextual purpose They want things that augment your kit. Interesting build paths. I agree with that, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Now, I disagree with this, though. They say that it's an interesting trade-off to decide, okay, you have 1,100 gold. Do you go back for a pickaxe or risk staying for a BF sword? This would be interesting if every class had to deal with this, but this is basically just 80 carries right now because most of the mages are not going to go for Rod of the Ages items. It's very rare. Most of them just go for Ludens and then, either Proto Belt or Zanya's or something else. Like Death Cap is extremely rare on most champs. Yeah, there's like Vagar and there's a couple of champs that get those items. But like right now, you just don't see a lot of champs going. Spellbinder is almost never seen. Death Cap is almost never seen. Most people just go for a mana item and then the double pin, right? So they'll just go like Ludens, Sork Boots, and then Morellonomicon almost every game. Maybe Azanya's. Maybe there's a couple of other like Proto Belt or a couple of other items in there, but that's kind of where a lot of places go. And why is that? Because it's a real pain in the butt to have to save for something that's that expensive, like Rod of the Ages. Unless you're in lane for an extended period of time, you're not forced back. Then it's a real inconvenience to have to stay that long. Just like they're saying right here, sometimes you get an early kill and you have to decide: do I overstay in this lane for this expensive item, or do I just go ahead and back? To get a weaker item, and then I have to wait even longer to get my expensive item. And it just feels awful because 80 carries are the only ones that have to do that, because you have to have BF Sword on a lot of 80 carries if you want Infinity Edge. This is specifically why there are some 80 carries, in fact most of them, are out of the meta right now, because they have to get Infinity Edge to function, and if they're up against someone who can get something cheaper, like Manamune for an earlier power spike, or just any of these other items, maybe Blade of the Ruined King as an early power spike item. Those are just much friendlier because they build out of things like long swords, and they have cheaper components, or Manamune finishes at 2,400 gold, and things like that. So I've talked about that a lot in the past, but that's a real problem when you have items that are over 1,200 gold that are just like, there are no smaller components for those items. You have to get the expensive item, and that means that you are locked into a specific back timing. And if it doesn't work out that well, if you get ganked, if you're just losing the lane, if you get poked out in the lane, if the enemy's threatening dragon or whatever, especially at higher levels of play, they're going to be familiar with these back timings, right? They're going to know that the enemy ADC is going to have to back soon for a BF sword, and so they're going to hover around the bottom side of the map, and as soon as you back to get your BF sword, they're going to get a dragon. And so it's just very predictable, and it's just really just bad, I think. And BF Sword is the biggest thing that sucks. That has to do with that, because Rod of the Ages, people just don't get those items because the back timing's so terrible. So, anyways, I've got some solutions for that, I think, but I don't like that. Hopefully they don't go in that direction. Now, deciding which components of Trinity, that is kind of interesting at times, but I don't like the pickaxe versus BF Sword. I don't think that's necessarily a good trade-off. Design is elegant. You only use the mechanics that you need. Good. Get rid of some bloat on the items and recalibrate the items to give people exactly what they want on those items. Don't give them extra crap they don't want, and just readjust the cost of the items to make all of them relatively competitive. You don't want to remove counterplay and weaknesses. Okay, so you don't want to make it to where every 80 carry is just automatically can be immune to assassins, or every tank can automatically be immune to 80 carries, right? And I think that's good. If you want to get something that counters a specific class of champs, if you want something like a Quicksilver Sash or a GA, you should have to pay a very steep cost. You should do a lot less damage if you want to do that. But it should be something that nevertheless is going to be useful for you if you do that in several different styles of situations. So, for example, if you get something that's good against assassins, it needs to be good against a bunch of different types of assassins, not just, one type. Because then if they have, like, an AP assassin and an AD assassin on their team, and you're an AD carry, it's going to feel really bad to get a Quicksilver Sash because the Talon might kill you, versus if you get a GA, then they might just chain CC you to death. And so, you don't want, you need to strike a careful balance between wanting to counter a specific type of champ and having something that's broad enough to where you're actually going to get that item in some games where it's actually going to be viable. But at the same time, you're sacrificing a lot in terms of your damage output to get those items. Okay. So that's kind of their overall goal, what they're going for. I like the idea. So let's talk about what I think the current problems are with items, and then I'll give you my solutions, and then I've got some examples. And if you enjoy this content, please be sure to like and subscribe. I spent a very long time crafting these items, trying to balance them out to give you guys some cool ideas. And so hopefully you enjoy it. And I do have lots of other guides on the channel. I stream every night starting around 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube. Very friendly, chill community. I try to talk with the chat as much as I can, explain what's going on in the game, my decision-making process, other stuff that could be going on, and just having some friendly banter, you know, telling some stories, listening to the stories and questions that y'all have. So it's a very cool community where you can actually talk and I'll actually respond in the chat, unlike some of those, you know, massive streams that have like 10,000 viewers where the chat's just scrolling with nonstop like emotes and memes. Those are fun to an extent, but I think it can make it feel a bit more like a community when it's kind of the smaller to medium-sized streams that can actually talk with you, like mine. So, anyways, be sure to check all that out. Okay, and also do, like I said, guides, tier lists, patch notes, all that stuff for every patch. Okay, so the big problems I think right now with itemization, and there might be more, and I just mentioned several of these, but these are some of the biggest ones. Power spike differentials are a huge thing. So what that means is certain champions can get to certain core items faster than other champions, and that makes it very difficult to balance them around the meta. So one of the key things that's very popular right now is Manamune, because it's only 2,400 gold, so it's significantly cheaper than most other items out there. And there is a trade-off early on where you do have to get a Tear of the Goddess, which is kind of worthless on a lot of champions. On like Ezreal, it is very strong because he can actually use the mana, but on things like Kai'Sa, it does make her weaker early. And there are a few other champs out there, but many champs have been using this just because it's a very cheap item. And if you can just survive the laning phase, you get a lot of stats, you get a lot of power, and now you even have champions that don't even care about the mana, like Draven has been getting this lately, and, you know, there have been some videos with, like, Graves and things like that abusing Manamune lately, and just because you wouldn't necessarily do that all the time, and, like, Fiora has done that as well, but it's because it's a super cheap item, and another item that's kind of like this is Proto Belt, and that's become a standard of a lot of these kind of assassin or not necessarily bruiser type of AP champs, but AP champs that aren't reliant on mana, that are melee early on. So you've got your Echo and your Fizz use it. I think Diana can use it. I don't know if she gets it all the time. Sylas. And so that creates these windows, these uneven windows of power when you're like a Fizz and you're able to finish your Proto Belt at 2,500, but the enemy is waiting to finish their Ludens for 3,200. That means you're going to have a window, depending on back timings and stuff, of maybe like 5 minutes where you're going to be significantly more powerful than them. And so that's going to give you a big chance to abuse them. Now, that does create, you know, some interesting moments of tension where someone, you know, like a good player will take advantage of that window and really, you know, press their edge and get ahead in the game. But then, and the other player will have to play really reactive, but it also creates lots of opportunities for difficult to balance situations when you have stuff like Sylas that not only, you know, has really good scaling and really good utility in team fights, but he can also get really cheap items like Proto Belt. Zanya's is another one that's like 2,600 gold, which has a pretty nice budget. Like, you get quite a bit of AP. It's like 75 AP, and you get armor, and you get a really good active on top of that for 2,600 gold. And like Proto Belt plus Zanya's are both very far under budget. You know, a lot of the other more traditional mages, you know, your Orianas, your Zoes, and things like that are going to be waiting on these 3,200 gold items, right? It's going to be Ludens or GLP, and then, you know, whatever they decide to go after that is probably going to be really expensive, probably double pen items, Morellonomicon, Sork boots. And so it just creates a very difficult to balance situation in a lot of cases. And you saw that with Sylas last year. He was nerfed. I think he was not necessarily nerfed, but he was changed literally 100 times throughout the season. And a big part of that is his itemization. because there's so many little cheap items that he can use. He can use the Protobelt Zanyas. He can end up. There was a tank stylist running around for a while, I think, with Iceborne Gauntlet, which gets abused all the time by like mages that have some tanky aspects that kind of want to go tank. So that can potentially be a big problem, is these power spike differentials. And of course we saw abuse as well, kind of famously with the Enchanter's top lane, where they would get Frostfang, which is a super cost efficient item, before they changed it, but nevertheless it still was very efficient. And then you saw them, getting the support items in other lanes. You saw the Ardent Censer, Athenes, stuff like that. And that has historically been a major problem with support items, which is another thing I'll talk about in a second in the support economy. But, well, I guess I can just combine it right now. Basically, a lot of enchanters specifically have very cheap items because they don't have an income stream. So, if you're playing something like Janna in the bot lane, you're not supposed to last hit any minions, but over time, Riot wants players to play support so queue times aren't, like 10 minutes, or everyone's not auto-filled to support. They want people to actually be able to play and enjoy enchanters. And part of the big part of enjoyment for a lot of support players is getting items. Back in Season 1, you just really wouldn't get items. You'd get an Aegis of the Legion, you'd buy like 20 control wards a game, which were called pink wards back then, and you'd get like Oracle's Elixirs and just all of these consumables, and you'd buy all these normal wards. You'd just basically be a ward bot with maybe one item. Maybe you could get like a Philosopher's Stone or a Heart of Gold, or just like some gold generating items that were trash. They were terrible by today's gold generating standards. You get no items. So a lot of people didn't want to play support because that's a cool part of the game, is getting items, feeling like you're getting more powerful, versus a lot of supports, they just kind of were the same all the time. And so for a lot of League's history, especially at high-end play, you just play a tank, so you'd play something that had really good CC and very high base stats and just spam a bunch of a bunch of vision items, and that was it. Well, then they decided to, add in a bunch more like very cost-efficient items. So items that are like maybe 2,000 to 2,300 gold. And they added in gold-generating items like the Frostfang, Relic Shield, all that kind of stuff. And those have evolved over time. But the general gist of it is they wanted cheap items for support because you don't have that much money, but they wanted to be very efficient. They wanted you to feel like you had a really high impact with really low gold. And but they also wanted that to not be able to spill into other lanes, because they didn't want your mid laner buying 2,000 gold items or 2,300 gold items, because that breaks this power spike differential, just what I was talking about. If you can get a super powerful item at 2,100 gold as a mid laner, and the other mid laner can't get that item can't get their core item until like 3,000 gold, you have 5 to 10 minutes where you can just abuse them when you complete your major item. And we saw this with Vladimir, and there are a couple other champs that were abusing this too, but the old Shirelias. And they eventually, I think, took it away, and then they brought it back, and they took out the AP from it, because he was getting it at like, I think it used to cost 2,300 gold. He was getting it and getting super powerful because he could abuse the early AP and the movement speed, and just be too strong. And the same reason they got rid of Will of the Ancients back in the day, which is like 2,500 gold. It was just too good on something like Vlad or Rumble or these other champs that could really leverage the the spell vamp early on off of the minions and just be unkillable. So, historically they've been very careful, and so the way that they've tried to balance that is pretty much anything that has plus healing or shielding on it, they consider it kind of a safe stat, because most other champions and most other roles do not want that stat. And they just kind of nerfed Ivern into the dirt, and he's been coming up a little bit, but he got nerfed like 1,000,000 times because he can run those items in the jungle, and it's too fast. You come online too fast. When you can get 2,100 gold items, Athenes, Redemption, stuff like that. Similarly, they nerfed Karma, they nerfed Lulu, they nerfed Sona, Soraka. Any of these champions that can go in solo lanes and get those items because they're just too cheap, and you can just become too powerful too quickly. This is part of why enchanters are so strong historically in the bot lane. They almost always have the highest win rates over time, is because they get the fast items, even on a cheap economy, even where they're not farming minions. they still get very fast very quickly. This is somewhat balanced out in the pro level because they're squishy. They have low base stats. They can get camped. They can get engaged on. They have a hard time with vision control later on. So that is partially how they've balanced it in pro. Is it's still good to play something like Braum or Tom because later on you can't be assassinated as easily. You can't, or you can face check bushes a lot better without getting blown up, and that's your trade-off for not scaling as well as something like a Janna or a Soraka. Now, a recent sort of abomination of this trend was Yumi, where she basically is a tank because she'll attach to a tank later on, and she gets the scaling from enchanter items. So that's something that has always been difficult to balance, is plus healing and shielding in general, and specifically the support economy, because those items are so cheap and so powerful. So that's something they probably need to take a look at. And I love enchanters, but I'm just saying it's really difficult to balance those items because of just how cheap they are. Now, I don't necessarily think they should be more expensive, but we'll talk about it when we get in there here in a second. I've got a couple of examples. But plus healing and shielding, and balancing that out with grievous wounds, like plus healing and shielding is so powerful in general that they had to create a special stat just to counter it. Because if you didn't know like how healing and shielding works, and I say this all the time on the channel, but it works with resistances. So if you give someone if someone has 1,000 HP and they have 100 armor, and you heal them for 300, then it's going to take 600 damage to counteract that 300 heal that you just gave them. Because every point of armor or every point of magic resist requires 1% extra damage of that type to take away 1 HP. So, for example, if you want to do 100 damage to somebody that has 100 armor, you're going to have to do 200 physical damage to them. It's going to get reduced by 50%. Then you're going to do a total of 100 damage after resistances are calculated. So the problem is healing, the more resistances somebody has, the stronger up it goes. And the same thing is true of shielding. Shields actually scale with resistances too. There are many games where that's not the case, but in League of Legends, shields do work with armor and magic resist. Now, shields are temporary, and healing is permanent, and grievous wounds affects healing, but does not affect shielding. So, anyways, the balance between healing and grievous wounds has always been really weird, because basically that's a hard counter item, and you have to have that item. You're forced into getting that item if they have a lot of healing, which is very popular right now. Soraka and Yumi are both super strong in the support role. You're seeing lots of people running things like Conqueror, Death's Dance, taking Spirit Visage, Ravenous Hunter. All that stuff is really popular in the jungle, in the top lane right now. So healing's a real problem in League of Legends, and so you have to have grievous wounds, but sometimes the answers to like getting grievous wounds can be really awkward. So getting executioners as an 80 carry can feel really bad because it doesn't build into anything worthwhile for a very long time in the game. And so you're basically paying 800 gold to get a necessary effect, but then you fall behind the other 80 carry because you're not doing as much damage, because now your main item effectively costs 800 more gold. You can't get your Infinity Edge now until 4,200 gold because you had to get an Executioner's Calling because they picked Soraka. So it's good against those champs, but it really feels bad against a lot of other champs, especially if you're against like something like a tank that has a lot of healing, because you need tank buster stuff, but you need anti-healing, and you also need to kill like the squishy assassin they have. So if they have like a Talon plus like a Maokai who's going to be getting things like Spirit Visage or a Dr. Mundo, it just feels terrible, because it's like, how on earth do you deal with that? You have to have a lot of upfront damage so that you can kill the Talon, but then you also need grievous wounds, and you need to upgrade that grievous wounds to Mortal Reminder so that you can shred their armor. So it can just lead to some really weird, like, feels bad situations right now with having to get grievous wounds and kind of its relationship with healing. And then another like major problem is thinking of how niche do you want items, like how much do you want an item that just tailors to like 5 to 10 champions. It's really cool on them, but no one else uses it, versus how much do you want to push items that are like so strong that almost everybody has to get that item, right? And so that's like the Spear of Shojin versus Infinity Edge. Most ADCs really want to get Infinity Edge still, and so it's like a required item on the vast majority of ADCs. They've diversified a little bit over time, but still, it's a very, very strong item on most ADCs, versus something like Spear of Shojin, which is just like super OP on like 3 champions, and no one else gets it. So you want to try to, balance that out, which is always tough. Okay, so how would I fix this? What's something that I would recommend? Okay, so I would have standardized back timings. Um, every time you back, if you and you still have choices within this paradigm, but now for every single class of champion, you're gonna have a similar set of choices that you can make, and that's gonna make it easier to balance around. So it's not just 80 carries who have to make that choice pickaxe versus BF sword, and then everyone else gets to buy cheap components on their backs, right? So I think that most components should be 400 to 600 gold. So anything that's like a little small item that combines into something else should be somewhere in that range. You shouldn't have things like a standalone blasting wand or a standalone pickaxe or a standalone BF sword or whatever, right? All of those things should build out of something. So how would you get around that? Do I want to get rid of pickaxe or BF sword? No, but what you do is you build long swords into those, just like you do with serrated dirks for the lethality champions. Because lethality champions, I think, are done really well, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. But, well, I guess I'll talk about it right now because that's going to relate to a lot of what I'm talking about when we're, moving up these standardized back timings. I think that lethality itemization and enchanter itemization is the best in the game right now. And they should model all of the other roles off of that. Now, why is it the best? Because they have really cheap components that are modular that build into a bunch of different types of items. And then each one of those components that builds into a combined item also builds into a completed item, a finalized item. And all of those are very modular. So that means you can react to different situations. You can have different back timings. And you're always going to have a good back, basically. So, for example, let's say that you get a kill in the lane early on and you really want to take a back. You have like 800 gold. Okay, go ahead and take a back. What can you get? All right, 2 longswords, no problem. Because those longswords can build into serrated dirk eventually, which builds into 4 completed items, which are all very strong. If you wanted to, you could also build that into a Caulfield's Warhammer later on. I don't remember the exact components of that, but I know that it's a serrated, or it has longswords in it. So you have all these options, but if you get a kill early as an ADC and you want to back, what can you get? It's like, well, and you have, like 800 gold, what can you get? It's like, well, I can't get a pickaxe. I guess I have to overstay on this wave and give up priority in the lane so that I can go back and get a pickaxe, right? So you're not free to go back and get what you want. If you're a mage, what do you get? And it's like, well, I can get an amp tome and like boots, I guess. Because you're not going to be able to get 2 amp tomes because that's going to be about 870, about the same as a pickaxe. So the fact that you can get 2 of these little longswords gives a huge edge to something like lethality users. The same thing is true of enchanters, right? They can always go back and get more fairy charms. Like there's so many little small components. They can get fairy charms. You can, if you're building into a redemption, you could even get a rejuve bead early on. You can get amp tomes if you need to. If you have 2 fairy charms, you can combine for 550 and get a forbidden idol or a chalice of harmony. You have 400 gold, no problem. You can get a ruby crystal. That builds into a bunch of different items that you'll get. That can build into Shirelias. That can build into redemption. So there are so many different little pieces that you can buy as an enchanter or as a lethality user that gives you really preferable treatment. If you're backing and you have 1,400 gold, close to 1,400 gold, you can get a serrated dirk plus a longsword for 1,450. So yeah, it's like they can get a BF sword for 1,400, but you can get something similarly good. You can get a dirk or a Caulfield's. Both of them are the same thing. Serrated dirk and Caulfield's, both 1,100. So you can get one of those plus a longsword and start building into your next item. So you can go big if you have a lot of money. You can get really good components. You can go small if you want to take a really quick back, or you get a quick kill, or there's just a specific timing that you want. Maybe your jungler wants to do dragon in 30 seconds, and you just happen to have enough to go get a couple of longswords. You can do that. So you just have so much more freedom with those builds. And then, like I said, those items are very modular. You get a serrated dirk, you can build that into Umbral Glaive, Dustblade, Ghostblade, Edge of Night, and all of these feel very different. They have different purposes. Umbral Glaive, really cheap, abusable item for 2,400 gold that gives you great vision control and pretty good stats. Dustblade, if you really want to have that one-shot potential, if you think you can snowball very well, if you're playing a champion that, can go invisible a lot. Dustblade's great. Ghostblade, you want to roam around the map a little bit more. You want to split push and try to run away when someone catches up to you. You just want some mobility. Ghostblade's your pick. They have some kind of like burst mage, or they have like a bunch of hook champions that you're having a hard time dealing with. You can get Edge of Night for the anti-CC. So each one of those has a different purpose, but they're all strong, and you can build them in any order and have a very effective build a lot of times. And you can also throw Black Cleaver in there too if you need to be a little bit tankier and you also want some more armor shred, because that has longswords in it also. So yeah, that's just really good. And then when you look at enchanters, it's the same deal. You get a Forbidden Idol. Okay, what can you do with that? Well, you can build an Ardent Censer if you want to help your AD carry do a little bit better, or someone else who has really good on-hit effects. You can get a Redemption if you want to double down on your team fight capabilities, or you want a semi-global ultimate to help your team out if there's some split pushing going on in side lanes. You want to help them out with a long-range Redemption, you can do that. Mikhails, they have a lot of CC. You need an answer to CC, you can get a Mikhails. It's not exactly the same, but if you have, you know, a Ruby Crystal and some Fairy Charms, you can say, hey, you know what? We've got a really strong Darius or Set, or, you know, some other bruiser or an Olaf, and I want to help them like run into the back line. I'm gonna go ahead and get a Shirelias. So there are 4 different items you can build out of very simple components. And you compare that once again to something like AD carry, you don't have that. You have to have a BF sword, or you have to have a Bilgewater. You know, like you have to have these expensive items that are difficult, except for like Varus, and that's partially why Varus is so OP in pro play these days with the lethality build. I mean, he has good stats, but a lot of it is he has really good itemization because he can get the lethality items to go with that. And so that's a huge part that a lot of people often overlook or don't think about, or is like how modular are the items and how good can you get your back timings. And so these 2 classes are just way, way better than other classes. Right, you compare that. I already talked about ADC a lot, but think about mages, right? Especially like mage supports. They get asked this all the time. What do I think about Zyra or Brand? And I say, you know what? You have to be really far ahead or it's going to feel bad. Why is that? Because, you know, there are some cheap components. You can get Amp Tomes and Ruby Crystals, and that's all good. But eventually you're going to have to get some Blasting Wands. This isn't as bad as a BF sword for an AD carry, but then again, you don't have a really good source of income if you're not getting kills or assists because you're not farming minions. So, Blasting Wand just feels terrible. If you have to take a back timing, like let's say that you've already bought your Oblivion Orb or something at Zyra, and all of a sudden, you know, for the next 5 or 10 minutes, you just can't get any kills, you might have to back because you need more wards, and you've only got 600 gold or 700 gold, and then it's just like, what do I do? You know, do I get an Amp Tome, or do I just go back and not use my 700 gold and just be basically down 700 gold in the next fight so that I can save up for Blasting Wand? So it just feels terrible when you have to buy a Blasting Wand, or you have to buy a BF sword or whatever, and there's nothing that builds into those. So how would I fix that? I would just make a modular, just like you have for all of the other classes. So what does that mean? That means for a BF sword, you can build that out of longswords. Double longsword and a BF. Boom. You know, problem solved. And I've got some examples for some items and what they might look like with these changes. But just BF sword, longswords, build it into BF swords. Just like Serrated Dirk, you can buy 2 longswords, build it into a BF sword. Blasting Wand, build it out of an Amp Tome. You know, 1 Amp Tome for Blasting Wand. Needlessly Large Rod, 2 Amp Tomes, build into a Needlessly Large Rod. And then that way, if you have to take some unfavorable backs, then you're not punished a disproportionate amount compared to other champions who have those more modular items. So I think that's really the way to go. So this is what I would look for if I was designing the items. 400 to 600 gold for most components. Okay, so that's like your Amp Tomes, your Longswords, your Ruby Crystals, all that stuff, somewhere in there. Longswords, it's 350, a little cheap, but it's okay. But that's what I would have it at. So that's what you want to like your single, just your baseline items should be about that much. Your combined items, this is where you take 2 items and you build them into one bigger item. I think that all of those should be about 800 to 1200 gold. And then a completed like major support item, particularly for enchanters, but you could have some, tanks might be a little bit more expensive, and you do want the tank items to be a bit more expensive because they have a better early game. They have better stats, they have better armor, magic resist, health, Usually they have defensive steroids and a lot more CC than most enchanters in the early game. Their mana costs are lower typically. So they're just better early, so it's only fair that their items are slightly more expensive. I'm not talking a lot more expensive, but like maybe 2,300 to 2,500 I think would be fair for tank items. And then like a utility or a follow-up item. I'll show you some examples of these, but like you have your big ticket item and then you want to go for like another follow-up item. So a historical example would be like the Zeal items, right? So then you want to get your Phantom Dancer or your Runins or whatever, or Zonya's Hourglass or Rylai's. Just some of these things that aren't the heavy hitters that you rush, but are good sort of follow-up utility type of items that you might want to get. I think that those should be priced at about 2,500 gold, and I've got some examples for you there. And then a keystone big ticket item that like you want and is going to make you huge should be 3,000 gold. I would get rid of all of these items. Certainly the ones that are like 3,500 plus are just ridiculous. The thing is, like in most games of League of Legends, you're not going to get to 6 items. Most of the time you're not getting to 6, but particularly if you're an 80 carry or one of these other, classes that needs a ton of gold, you're just realistically not going to get there a lot. And so if you do get there, you are really strong. You're a nice hyper carry because you're very slot efficient because you have a lot of gold concentrated in those building slots. But that can also make 80 carries feel pretty OP in like 50-minute games because they can just fit more gold into their pockets, basically, in their item slots. They can fit more gold in there. So that puts other classes, like some tanks, some junglers, some of these early game champs, makes them potentially disproportionately weak early on. So I think that you do want some champions that have some more expensive items that do scale a little bit better, but I think that the gap is just too much. I think that 80 carries are, and I keep mentioning them because they have some of the most expensive builds in the game. I think that they're a little too weak early on because their items are so expensive, and I think they're a little too strong in the late game because their items are so expensive. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. So I would just flatten that curve a little bit. Once again, some differentiation, but not as much as there is right now. So I would make keystone items, standardize them, 3,100 or 3,000 gold, and then this will give everyone in a lot of games a chance to build, like one completed item. You got your boots. I would probably make the boots about 1,000 gold each. So you've got a completed item, then you've got your boots, and then you get, maybe enough gold left over for like 2 utility items or 2 follow-up items in a lot of games. That's about 10,000 gold. I think that's where a lot of people get to. Or if the game goes longer, you might be able to get 2 keystone items off of that. And even then, you're only going to be at 5 items. So you still would not get to full build until like 18 to 20,000 gold. And I just think a lot of games aren't going to go that long. And it feels good to get items. You like to complete items. They're fun. They're cool. People want more items in more games. And I just think that it's so rare that people get to 6 unless they're like 15-0 or something, that I think that there should be more cases where people can get to 5 or 6 items, because I think that's just more fun. More items, more fun, more sense of progression. It's all good, right? That would also make games complete a little bit faster too. If people had more items earlier on in the game, you wouldn't get as many of these 40 to 50 minute games. Okay. So I would say definitely you don't want a lot of completion costs over 800, and I wouldn't want components or like combined items or components, single items that don't have any prerequisites that are over 800 gold. Once again, I've got examples here in a second. I want more items with unique actives and passives, but less stats. I think this is something they mentioned as well, is hidden power in the game, right? And stats are the biggest hidden power thing. Sometimes some champions are just really good because they have really good stats, or like items are really strong just because the way they're statted, they feel really OP. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize. It's like, that item's just really strong because armor scales super well on that champion because they just have really good ratios for armor. Or like AD seems really strong because this champion has really good AD. So you got to be careful because you don't want too many actives. You don't want everybody to have like, 5 actives, because that can just get too busy and really overwhelming, especially for newer players. I've played in metas as a support where I've had like 4 actives before, and it does get very hard to manage if you have like Redemption, plus Locket, plus Shirelia's, plus, I don't know, some other item in there. Then it can get very difficult to manage. Plus Mikhail's. I think that's actually like a literal build that was pretty standard and pretty popular 1 or 2 years ago. It was Redemption, Mikhail's, Locket, and then Shirelia's. So yeah, it was like 4 item actives. It was really fun back when you had Ruby Sightstone. You got the 20% cooldown reduction, but it's a lot to manage for a lot of people. So you don't want too many actives. Maybe just like, ideally 1 active item per class is cool, just so there's like 1 extra thing you can do. It feels like you have an extra ability, but I wouldn't really want a standard build on most champs to be more than like 2. So more unique actives, more unique passives, clearer purpose and differentiation. Like an item, it should be very obvious why you would want to buy this item, and it should contribute to a very clear purpose that you're working towards, right? You are an attack speed champion. You want items that give you the attack speed and the on-hit damage that you want. You're a tank, okay, they have a lot of armor, or they have a lot of physical damage. You should have really good armor items that'll help you out, or really good magic resist items that'll help you out, right? And you want to avoid just these kind of like blobs of just stats that just make something too good in all situations. Historically, the item that's violated this the most is Bulwark, which has been, first it was Aegis, then it was Bulwark, and now it's Locket. It used to have so many things on it. It used to be like magic resist, armor, CDR, health, and gave a really good shield. And it's just like, why would you not get that item? Right now, it's probably Gargoyle Stoneplate for tanks. It's like you just kind of get that all the time because it gives you armor and magic resist and has a really good active that basically makes you invulnerable for 3 seconds. So it's just like every tank kind of has to get that item because it has everything. So I think that's really poor design. You don't want jack of all trade items, or you don't want many things where it's just like you buy that all the time in every comp. I think you want more niche type of items where it's situational, where it's like, okay, it's a trade-off. Do I want to personally be strong, or do I want to help my team? Do I want magic resist, or do I want armor? Do I want, something that's going to help me rotate around the map and take objectives, or do I want a team fight item? So I think these should all be the types of questions that you're asking. Not, I just need to buy this every time because it's good. Zeke's is another kind of item that's sort of like this, right? It's got armor, it's got magic resist, it has mana, it has CDR, and it has a really good active that's good on almost every tank support. And it just feels like it's too strong. So anyways, I think that's what we should be working towards. So very clear, distinct purposes. All right, and for the last 20 minutes or so, I just want to go over some of these items. And once again, it's going to be some standard items that people are familiar with, and then I'm going to add in like maybe 1 or 2 new items, and just sort of change the way that a couple of these items are working to meet some of these goals that I just talked about. So hopefully Riot will do something like this, but we'll see. But I'll just show you in action what would my theory of solutions look like to items. Okay, so Infinity Edge, going down to 3,000 gold. It is 3,400 right now. So you're going to have to take away, once again, a lot of power off of this, but you're going to come online faster. And that's a common theme with a lot of these keystone items. And I have this broken up into a few examples of keystone items. So those are like your big ticket items that define the type of champion that you're playing and are going to like dictate your playstyle. Then you have clean follow-up items. So items that aren't bloated with a bunch of random garbage. They're just very clear, okay, you're going for this style of play. This is an item that you probably want, right? And then you have mid-tier utility items. So items that are about 2,500 gold that you wouldn't want all the time, but there are some key situations where you would probably want these items. So it's not going to be for every champ. It may not even be for the champs that like it in every game, but it's going to be really good in the games where it's good. And then finally, we have situational components. So these are things that right now have really good like components, like Executioner's Calling or Spell Pen or Grievous Wounds, like stuff that you want early. But having a separate item for that that's really cheap, that's like 2,000 gold, that's efficient, but doesn't have many stats on it at all. So you're paying just for the very powerful, unique effects that it has, but it's a very low stat item. So you're paying a very heavy cost to get that utility out of those items. Okay, so let's go over a couple of these here. Okay, Infinity Edge. So BF Sword. So I think that BF Sword now should be 1,000 gold and 300 AD. That's about the same efficiency, and I'm gonna break out the calculator here on you. Because if we look right now, BF Sword is, and I'll show you kind of what the item is right now, and then I'll just run some really quick math on a couple of these items and just show you what I think would be a good build. And I'm trying to keep the power about the same on most of these items. I'm just changing around the efficiency. So I don't think it would warp the meta too much to do this, and I'll explain why. It'll bend it a little bit in ways that I think would be healthy, but I don't think that it's going to warp it and make certain classes really OP. Okay, so right now a BF sword is 1,300 gold, and it gives you 40 attack damage, right? And so if we look at this item, I think it's like just a little bit over 100% efficiency. So it's 107% efficient right now. But once again, it's the timing on it. It really sucks, and it's something that AD carries uniquely have to deal with because no one gets needlessly large rods, right? It only builds in a death cap, which hardly anybody gets. Maybe ultra late game, or if you're just like, 12-0 or something, maybe you get a death cap on most champions. And then Spellbinder, just nobody gets that item. So it's mages don't have to mess with that. Like Shyvana, maybe Vagar, there's a couple of champs that, might go for rods, but mostly it's not them. But a lot of ADCs have to get BFs, like I mentioned before. So that's a unique problem. So what if we dial it back a little bit, right? We take it down to 30 AD, but we only make it cost 1,000 gold now, and it builds out of 2 longswords. This is very close to Serrated Dirk. If this is a little too cheap, you could make it Serrated Dirk price for 1,100, but I think that this is a pretty good build. So longswords are 350 each, and they have 15 AD each, I believe, right? 10 AD each. So that would give you 20 total for 700, and then another 300 gold to get your last 10. So it's about on curve, right? And if AD, it's 35 a pop on AD. Let me actually do it. Sorry, 35 times 30. You're getting 1050 gold for 1,000. So divided by 1,000. Boom, 105% efficiency. So you are giving up a little bit because it's cheaper. So instead of 108% efficiency, now it's only 105. But it's just a lot friendlier. Now you can buy those longswords just like the lethality users. Now you can kind of keep up with talent on back timings if you're playing, Caitlyn, or if you're playing Twitch or Tristana or some of these other champs. You can keep up with the back timings a little bit better. So I think that's nice. So you would just have a BF sword, and then another BF sword, so 2 BF swords, that's 60 total AD. Once again, you can just build all long swords on this too. It's not, back in the day, Infinity Edge, I guess a couple of years ago, they made it double BF sword, and it felt terrible because there were no components. But now there's components. You can just get 4 long swords if you want to on your backs. If, you have really weird back timings, you can just get those long swords just like a lot of the lethality users can do. And then Crit Cloak. Now, Crit Cloak is 800 gold, and I think that feels really bad. I would just bring back Brawler's Gloves. They got rid of this because I think it was Trendemir really abused it, but all you have to do to fix it, unique, 10% crit. Now you can't get multiple Brawler's Gloves. I don't know why they didn't get rid of this before, because some champs would really like early crit. I mean, Yasuo and Trendemir specifically would like some early crit. And now, if you're waiting on a Crit Cloak, you don't have to wait for 800 gold. You can get one for 400. But you don't want someone like Yasuo just buying like 5 Crit Cloaks on his first back or whatever and getting 100% crit, right? And the same thing with Trendemir. You don't want him abusing that. So just make it unique. I don't know why that's so hard for them to figure out. But anyways, unique, 10% crit. Okay, fixed. Now you can get a cheap component to go with your longswords if you want to build in a Crit Cloak. So this item would have 65 AD, so that's minus 15 AD. 25% crit, so that's the same. I really like the idea of every crit item having 25% crit. It's just nice, clean numbers, very easy to understand, easy for Yasuo to get to 100% off of 2 crit items if he wants it, easy just to understand for other champs. So I really like that. And then a 20% modifier instead of 25. So we took off 15 AD. So that's minus 525 gold. And then we lowered the modifier by 20%. So you are losing some gold on this item, and you need to lose gold on the item to make it fair because it's cheaper. It lowers your curve. So it is going to be a little bit, it's not going to be quite as strong whenever you complete it. But overall, you will still end up getting some advantages out of it. Is that right? Let me see. 2275. Yeah, plus 1,000 equals 3275. Yeah. It's 2,800. Yeah, and then you get the combined cost. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I think that's fair. So 20% modifier, so you're not going to scale as hard with crit. You're going to scale about 20% less because you're not going to have that crit modifier, but you're going to come online faster. You're going to be more relevant early on in the game. So I think that that is a really fair trade-off just to make ADCs a lot more relevant early and not so oppressive and OP later on in pro play. Next, Blade of the Ruined King. So this one's traditionally 3,200 gold, so I would lower that down to 3,000 again. How would we do this? Well, we have Recurve Bow, exact same thing as it is now. That doesn't change. Bilgewater. I would change Bilgewater significantly. So I would take away the active on Bilgewater and lower the cost by 400. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense thematically to have an AD carry that early on can get an item that does 100 flat damage off of the Bilgewater active and applies a slow. Like, that's just like an assassin type of trait. So, I mean, it's nice on champions that have it, but it's like a lot of these champs aren't going to be looking to use that and assassinate early, right? They're looking to farm up like a lot of other AD carries are. So if you're playing something like, you know, Kog'Maw or Varus, I guess it's nice to have that active, but I think it'd be really good just to get rid of it and just make it cheaper, you know, get online faster, just at about the same rate as a BF sword. A little bit, takes a little bit longer. And it should, because you can get an early Vamp Scepter, which gives you a lot of extra sustain in the early game, and you have to respect that. That's very powerful. That gives people a free pass in a lot of lanes, so you got to be careful giving out lifesteal in the early game. But I think that that is a fair trade-off, in that now you have a cheaper item that's very clean in its purpose. Lifesteal plus AD, you're going for on-hit. You want attack speed, you want on-hit, you want AD, and you want lifesteal. You don't care about that active. Like, it's nice, but that's not the identity of the item. That's just a bloated stat that unnecessarily makes the item cost a lot more than it needs to achieve its purpose for the a clean purpose for the AD carry. Okay, so then what would the completed item look like? Okay, 30 AD, 25% attack speed, 10% lifesteal, and then 10% maximum HP physical on-hit damage with no active. Okay, so once again, we're taking off this active because it's not a clean identity with this champion. A lot of times, yes, it can help you kite stuff out a little bit. Yes, it can help you run some people down, but that's not really what this item should be about. This item is about doing on-hit damage for AD champions. Like, this is the cornerstone item if you're going for an on-hit build, if you want to build Gensus, if you want to build Hurricane, this is what you want. Okay, so that's what it's all about. If you want a rundown item, go get Ghostblade, or you know, go get something else that has an active like that. I guess with the Bilgewater change, you know, maybe you'd have to figure out some substitute for something like Gunblade, but Gunblade's so strong anyways on the champions that use it, the Katarinas, the Akalis, and things like that. You could find some other way. I mean, the fact that it's cheaper would help them out too. Then you could make the Gunblade cheaper as well. Take that down to about 3,000 gold. I didn't look at Gunblade here, but that would be another keystone item. But I think this is just a lot cleaner. Now it's 10% max HP on hit. You don't have to worry about minimum damage. You don't have to worry about this strange math. Like, okay, it's current health, so, you know, do I want to be attacking this tank or not? It just feels really weird because as someone gets lower, it's like they're taking less and less damage. So I think max health is good, and I would take it down from 12% to 10%. If this is too strong, then just take it down to 8%. But I think just doing maximum health is just a lot cleaner, and that's a lot more congruent with other abilities out there. Like, most other things in the game do maximum health, not current health. So I think that would be cleaner. So once again, I don't know if the number on that is correct. It might be a little OP, you know, maybe knock it down to 8%, but I think that would just clarify the purpose a lot. So we trimmed some AD off of it. Usually comes with 40 AD because, once again, the main purpose of this item is attack speed and on hit. I think it would be a little too OP if you went all out on attack speed, if you went like 50% attack speed or 60% attack speed or something crazy like that. I think that would be a little too much for a keystone item. I think it needs to have some AD in there, just so you're not giving them too much of a good thing, and just so that it is kind of like a little more flexible for some champs that might want more AD. But I think this is the right mix. Trim the AD a little bit in order to give a bit more power to the on-hit, and then you get rid of the active, and for all of that, you're dropping it by 200 gold. So basically, you're getting rid of the active for 200 gold, which I think is a fair price. And then you're trimming the AD so that you can get it faster and so that you have a more powerful on-hit. So just remember, the 10% max on hit is way more than 12% current, but you also have, you don't have the active, and you don't have the 10 AD. What is it, Rory? Good job. So I think this just clarifies the purpose and strengthens what this item is supposed to be good at, which is max damage, ideally either breaking tanks or having synergy with Runin's Hurricane or Gensu's to make an on-hit build. What is it, Rory? Good job. Okay, Trinity. This one's one that's a little bit more experimental in my book, so this one, you know, could be a little OP, could go either way, but this is an example of getting rid of stats on items and making more unique and, like, more interesting combinations of uniques. So that you're saying, all right, I'm not going to have a lot of baseline stats, but this thing's going to give me a lot of stuff that I really want. So you would want this maybe on a champ that has really high base damages that just wants utility. Or you're going to combine this with another really heavy hitting item. You want some? So that's what I think, is this is basically like the mother of all utility items that's like super expensive. So let's talk about why did I decide to go in that direction, and how do I think that that plays in with this. Okay, here you go, Roy. You got it. There you go. You're welcome. So it's going to build out of Phage and Sheen, which are the same, but then I'm going to incorporate Tiamat in there, and I'm modifying all of these a little bit. Okay, so it's going to have 30 AD on it, which is, I believe, a little bit less AD than it currently has. We're getting rid of the attack speed, because I think champions that would like this kind of stuff don't really care about attack speed that much. Like, having a high attack speed item, it really kind of fits in with that on-hit build with the Blade of the Ruined King and stuff like that. And we already have one of those. We already have Blade of the Ruined King, right? So if you're going, like, attack speed and on-hit, that's where you go. You could do a combination if you want to go real big. If you want, you know, to have all of this utility, but you also want the attack speed and on-hit, you can do that. You can do a Blade and a Trinity build if you're like an Irelia or something. But this gives them a lot more clear, distinct purpose to get rid of the attack speed here. Also, Stinger is kind of the weak link. Like, it's just really weird to buy that item on a lot of champions that don't want the attack speed. Like, GP doesn't particularly care about the attack speed. And there are lots of Trinity Force users where the attack speed is not going to be a high priority stat line, right? So it's nice, it's not bad, but that's a huge part of your budget. You know, attack speed, 40% attack speed, which it had, ends up accounting for 1,000 gold on the item, which is a lot. So you could spend that 1,000 gold and get something much more interesting that more champions would be might be interested in, right? And so yeah, but Rory, Daddy's working right now. Can you honey, can you play with Rory? Rory, pizza! Yummy pizza! Go talk to Mommy.
I don't.
Well, Mommy might have some chocolate chips for you too. Go talk to her. She'll give you some chalky chips. Yeah, go get her. Mommy will give you the chalky chips. And so I dropped it down to 10% CDR too. I just think that 20% CDR items shouldn't exist. I think you should have to have multiple items. No, Rory. No. Okay? It's okay. Daddy's not mad, but look, can you go in there and play with Mommy? You can't pour water near the computer, okay, Rory? It's okay. Look, Daddy's not mad at you, honey. Can you please?
I can't get to her. Come here, baby. Here. Oh my goodness.
It's okay, Rory. Daddy's not mad at you, okay? You can't pour water near the thing.
Open cups of water around this computer when we have a talk.
Well, I'm drinking because she's not supposed to be in here when I'm working. Okay, sorry about that. She'll be fine in a second. She's just tired. She was trying to pour, like, I have a cup of water here. And she was trying to pour it into this little smaller cup that I had for coffee. Like, right next to the keyboard. But anyways, okay. Sorry about that. That's just family life, trying to record videos during the day. But anyways, so you get rid of the attack speed, right? Because it's like, yes, some people would like it, but I think you could trade it out for the Tiamat, and more people would like that. Because the thing with Tiamat is, it's like, it's a cool item right now on champions that really, really want wave clear, but it's a very hotly contested item because a lot of champs that get Tiamat don't want to build it into anything else. So they don't want to build it into Ravenous. They don't want to build it into Titanic Hydra. Some champions do. Some champions will eventually. But it's just this really weird, like, standalone item that's like wave clear, but just is kind of a road to nowhere. So you can get it, and it gives you really good push and pressure early, but it just can kind of feel bad if you don't leverage it, especially at lower tiers of play where people really don't leverage the lane advantage that they get. So it's an item that can be really OP potentially in like challenger or high level play because of the clear, but in lower level play, it's not that good. So it's been very difficult for Riot to balance. But it does enable a lot of really cool builds, and it makes certain champions a lot more viable than they would be otherwise. So, for example, like Warwick really likes Tiamat in the jungle. He is a pretty strong jungler. But then stuff like Talon potentially could like Tiamat. There's a lot of champs who could like it. So, anyways, I think incorporating it into an item that would fit the playstyle of those types of champs that don't want the lifesteal, pretty much only Fiora ends up getting Ravenous Hunter. It's just kind of a noob trap item for most people. And then Titanic is really for tanks. So there's a lot of like squishy AD type of champs that want wave clear, especially melee champs that want the wave clear so they can keep up with the mages. But they don't want to build it into either of those items. So I think that it might be good right here. So you're losing the 40% attack speed. I think you're losing some AD. Let me, I thought I had Trinity over here. Let me pull this up here real quick. Oh, here it is. Items. So I believe the baseline had a little bit, I know it had 40% attack speed. That might be the same amount of AD that it normally has, but just like look at how bloated this is. Like the definition of a bloated item that just has random stats all over it that like no champion is going to really want all of these in the same proportion. Right. So we it has a little bit more attack damage. It has 5 extra AD, but it has 10% less CDR, 40% less attack speed. We got rid of the mana on it, and we got rid of the movement speed on it. Okay, so that's a lot. But what are you getting for that? Okay, so in exchange for that, you're getting the Tiamat built into it. You're getting the wave clear built into the item. And with Tiamat, I think that Crescent, the active, would always give 100% clear, but then you do not have the cleave. So every attack doesn't necessarily push the wave, but with the active, it's always going to do 100% to everything around it. So that's going to delay your ability to wave clear until you get a little bit more AD, so that you can't just like perma instantly push it without using the active. And if you use the active, then you're going to be a lot weaker for all ends. So I think that's a much more fair way to try to balance Tiamat, is to say, look, you can go up and clear this wave pretty quickly if you want to, but you're paying a lot of gold for that active. And if you use it, you're not going to have it for an all-in. Because right now, you can currently just go up and just push with the cleave, just normally auto-attacking it, and you can hold the active for an all-in. So you're going to have to choose, do I want to all-in? It's only a 10-second cooldown, but, you know, high-level players can abuse that. So you'd have to choose, do I want to hold it for the all-in, or do I just want to wave clear and roam? And then if you do that, if they see you do it, they can go run at you and try to force a fight before you get a chance to roam. So I think that's a much more balanced way to go after Tiamat, is to force someone to use an active, even if it's a low cooldown. But it does when you use the active, it has better wave clear. So it does do 100% always to everything, even at the edge. If you go into melee combat, you're almost always doing 100% anyways to the champions. That's not increasing the damage on champions. But when you try to wave clear a wave, when it's a little bit more spread out, it currently only does 60% at the edges of it. And so this would do 100% at the edges. So it's going to give better clear on the active, but not as much elsewise. And we're taking the rejuvenation off of it because it just doesn't make any sense. Why does it have that on it to begin with? So we're knocking off the rejuvenation on Tiamat, and we're lowering the AD down to 15. But we're also lowering the price down to 1,000. So once again, oh God, we're going to go way over time. But whatever. I just want to talk about these items. I spent a lot of time on it, and I think this is a really fun sort of exercise to think about this. Maybe get the conversation started with y'all. But let me just pull up Tiamat here real quick. So it currently has 25 AD. It has this 50% base regeneration, which is kind of worthless. You know, it's 150 gold, so it does add up, but then you lower that down a little bit. You go to 15 AD instead. So you have 15 times 35 equals 525. So now you're paying 475 for the active, which is what you're currently paying about that right now. It costs 1325, so it costs 300 right now for the active. So with my sort of system here, it would cost you 475. So it costs more, but once again, it's cheaper, so you can get it faster. You can get it 300 gold faster. So I think ultimately that's going to be worth, and now it builds into an actually a really useful item potentially with Trinity Force instead of being a dead end item. So you gotta balance for that, right? You gotta take a little bit of power off of it, take a little bit of AD off, and now you gotta say, look, you want that wave clear? It's going to be awesome. It's a lot cheaper. It's going to help you clear when you use the active, but you're potentially going to be more vulnerable to all ends because you're going to have 10 less AD. You're going to have less regeneration off a rejuve bead, and you're going to have to use that active if you really want to clear the wave. So I think that's a fair way to do Tiamat in general. And so this item's going to have Tiamat built into it. So this is one, like I said, where it's going to have really like much lower stats, but it's going to bring a lot of utility. So you have the Phage Rage, which is every time that you kill a minion or every time you damage something, you get a little bit of extra movement speed. That's going to allow you to stick to stuff a lot better, run people down. You're going to have Spellblade. And I changed Sheen to knock off the mana on it because I feel like that's just really awkward. So I don't really know what components you would use. Maybe you just make it just has to be a completed item at 800 for Sheen. Like there's no components. You just pay 800 and you get Sheen. I think that might be a better way to do it. So that takes off the mana. It makes it cheaper. But once again, it clarifies, okay, you're getting this item because every time you activate an ability, you want to do the extra damage. So there are some champions that really like that mana, early on, like GP, and there, probably a couple others. So I don't know. Like there are some champs that would like to not have that though. But anyways, it's just something to think about. If that's too much, we can put the mana back on it. But I think having Spellblade is good. I would lower the Spellblade down to 150% from 200% because getting all of these uniques is super strong to begin with. So taking away just a little bit of spike damage, and once again, that's because now you have Spellblade and Crescent on the same item. So you can, go in, and if you want to burst somebody, you can Spellblade them with your Irelia or whatever, and activate Crescent to hit them for the 100% extra AD on top of that. So it's going to be potentially even more burst damage than Trinity Force already has, which once again reinforces why you're getting that item. You want to wave clear, you want to have burst, you want to be able to stick to people, right? So I kept the HP on it from the Phage, took off the mana, it's 10% CDR, so you can't spam your abilities as much, but whenever you hit them, you're going to hit them hard. You don't have the attack speed, but once again, you're trying to hit them with the burst, right? It's like you're a bruiser champ, you want to get in their face, burst them out. That's what you want, right? So not like an assassin, not quite as much as like a lethality user with Dustblade or whatever, but that's what you're going to have here. So anyways, I think that it's going to be pretty strong. It does have less AD than a lot of the lethality items. It doesn't have as many stats as a lot of other items. It doesn't have lethality, the stat on it, but it has all three of these uniques, which I think work really well in that it has the wave clear, it has the burst off of Spellblade, and it has the stickiness of Rageblade. So if you want more uniques, and it is Trinity, so it's 3 different items that are all relevant, that are all strong. You get 3 different uniques that are all relevant, that are all strong. You don't have the weird stinger. So I think it's very good. And now it has a very clear build path with reasons why you would want all of these different items. I think a lot of people with this would probably take the Tiamat early, but you could go Sheen if you want more burst. You could go Phage if you want more stickiness. The Phage does cost less as well, if you notice that. So it's 10 AD now and 150 health to get to that. So you can get all of these like cool actives that enhance your playstyle that you want to do for a lot cheaper, although they have less base stats on them. So I think that's what Riot is saying that they wanted to go for, and I think that would be super cool. Once again, unique playstyle choices, but less invisible power, less outright big stats on them. Okay, and then Death Cap is the last one, and this is another item that like nobody gets right now because it's just too expensive. It builds out of needlessly large rods, which suck, and it scales, so it's something that you don't really get until like much later in the game. So I would just diversify the stats that it has on it a little bit, but still give it a very clear purpose, and that is you want a very heavy AP item that doesn't have penetration on it and doesn't have mana on it. So this is going to be good for champions that either take runes such as Presence of Mind and Mana Flow Band so they don't need mana because they're using their rune power to get the mana, or they're planning on getting a lot of blues, or they're just planning on getting another mana item and combining it with Death Cap if they want to go for double big items. So if they want to go for like Ludens plus Death Cap, they can do that now much more reasonably if they don't care about Spell Pen, for example. Right? So there are a lot of champions that have utility in their kit that maybe don't want the Spell Pen as much, like Orianna. Right? She has a shield. The shield doesn't benefit from Spell Pen. Karma middle. Morgana middle. Like there's a lot of champs that don't care as much about the Spell Pen. So I think this is a good thing for them. And this could even be a top-end item for like an enchanter if they wanted to get something like this, because they would probably like 100 AP, 10% CDR, all of this stuff. Right? So if you're, just really rich and you're Nami or Janna or whatever, and you want to sacrifice some utility to get some bigger shields, you could get this as well. So I think it would be very usable for a lot of different champs in different scenarios. But you would just go Aether Wisp, Fiendish Codex. Now I trimmed Fiendish Codex a little bit. I took it from 900 down to 800 just to make it kind of fit in a little bit better with the curve. And then I took 5 AP off of it to compensate for that. So now it's a clean 30 AP instead of 35, 10% CDR, and it costs 800 gold. So you just get Aether Wisp, Fiendish Codex, Blasting Wands. These are all like pretty cheap components. The Blasting Wand, once again, can build out of Amp Tome, and you complete it into Blasting Wand. And yeah, so now you can just get a bunch of these items and just kind of feel it out. You can get you some, Amp Tomes early and just kind of see where the game goes. Do you want to get into Ludens? Are you getting your blues or not? If the jungler is being greedy with the blues, not giving it to you, and you got a couple of Amp Tomes, you can switch over and get Ludens. If they're giving you the blues, maybe you go Death Cap. And then this is just a much more balanced item. 100 AP, 10% CDR. Lots of mages love CDR, but it's very hard to get it as a mage. But there are some that really want it. Sustained damage mages, your Cassiopeias, your Ryzes, stuff that's not like all-in burst is really going to like the CDR. So 100 AP, 10% CDR, 5% move speed, and then plus 20% of your total AP. Right now it's currently 40% of your total AP, which gets a bonus. So it's bringing down the power a lot, but it's getting this extra utility. So that you have the movement speed if you want that. You get the CDR. You still get 100 AP, which is a lot, and it's a lot more affordable at 3,000 gold. So once again, it's less extreme. If you have 20 kills, and you're just balling out of control, it's not going to be as good. But for most people in most games, this is going to be a much more reliable item. Once again, if you're a champ that doesn't necessarily care about pen and doesn't care about mana as much as raw AP. So once again, that'd be like a Veigar, an Orianna, just any of these other champs that have abilities that don't do damage but have some kind of shield that scales off of AP. They would like this. Okay, couple more items, and then we'll go ahead and call it a day. So it's going to take a bit longer than I thought, but I spent a long time on this. I had a lot of fun designing it. And I just want to throw these out there just to once again see what y'all think about it. Just kind of hope and pray that Riot does something kind of like this. Or at least in this kind of like philosophy. So 2,500 gold clean follow-up items. So just items that are very clear in their purpose that are good follow-ups. So a couple of ones that I really wanted to emphasize here, and that you could do this with other builds as well, but I think the attack speed on-hit builds just do not have clean items at all. It's just a mess with their items, and so I picked a couple of them right here just to kind of clarify and help out, the Kog'Maws, the on-hit Varuses, the Kaisas potentially, maybe Vayne, and just stuff like that, just to give them, maybe even Twitch, just to give a bit more clarity. So I think Ginsu's Rageblade is another one like Trinity Force. It's one of the most bloated items. It just has so many ridiculous random stats on it. Like, I don't know what they were smoking when they designed this item, but it's been a nightmare for people to balance. And it's like almost no champion, kind of like Trinity Force, actually wants all of the stats on these items. What they want is the Phantom Hit, right? That's the cool thing. That's what makes this item unique. They want the completed passive that allows you to get multiple hits from your on-hit abilities or from your on-hit items. So I think that's the really cool part that's unique about it. The Ginsu's Rage, every third attack triggers a Phantom Hit where you get the on-hit. So that's cool. And that's fun. It's like, okay, I got my Blade of the Ruined King, or I got my Silver Bolts, I got my Master Yi Double Strike, I've got my Kog'Maw like W. Like there's a lot of fun things that interact with that, and so that's unique and that's fresh. What's not unique and what's not fresh is 25 ability power, 25 AD, 25% attack speed, 15 bonus magic damage on hit instead of physical damage. 15% armor pen, 15% magic pen, stacking 8% bonus attack speed per attack up to 6 times or 48%, and then you have your on hit damage. It's like, what? Like, it's like someone was designing this and it's like, hey, let's throw this in there too. And someone's like, yeah, that sounds cool. Hey, how about if we throw this in there too? Because like no magic users use this hardly. Like that's another thing that is a big problem. And some of these items too, the Ginsu's Rageblade and maybe to a lesser extent the Hurricane, could apply to some ranged champions that want attack speed and potentially want some on hit as well. So I can't think about everybody who would want that right now, but there might be some, especially Ginsu's. People that like to attack fast might like this. So maybe something like a Diana might want to get this new Ginsu's. You might like maybe someone like a just anyone that might like Nashers might also like this, and you could combine that with Nashers potentially. But what I'm thinking here is just clarify it, just go all in, just say, look, this is a big attack speed item with some on hit, and it has its unique passives. This is just going to be a lot cleaner, right? Look at this. So we have recurve bow, right? Standard, same as it is right now, 1,000 gold, 25% attack speed, 15 on hit, physical damage. I don't know why they changed it to magic damage. Like, it's literally the same amount, 15 bonus hit, but they changed it to magic instead of physical. But anyways, physical damage, and then I just made up an item here called Dexterity Gloves. There's a couple of items that I created, but this is just a small component item that gives you move speed plus attack speed. I think there are a lot of champions out there that would like an item like that. So especially things that don't have dashes, like your Kog'Maws, your Twitches. I guess Vayne kind of has a dash. But things that like attack speed, they need time. Usually they don't do a lot of burst damage, so they need time either to kite or to try to chase people down so they actually do damage instead of like Annie, who just like rolls her hand across the keyboard and deletes somebody, right? Or any number of other assassins out there. It's all about positioning. It's all about buying time. So I think it would be really nice to have an attack speed item that also gave you some movement speed. Some mage items get movement speed, like Aether Wisp, for example, gives you AP plus movement speed. You've got like Ghost Blade for assassins that gives them a hell of a lot of movement speed, but those are just like burst out champions anyways. They just get on top of you and just roll their hand across the keyboard and probably kill you, right? So it's like, why can't 80 carries have movement speed? Or just something else that wants to stick to people, why can't it have movement speed? The champions that actually need to do real damage over time, that need to be able to kite, that need to be able to move, they don't have it. So I think it'd be nice. So I just called it Dexterity Gloves. 1,000 gold, 25% attack speed, 10% movement speed. So this is the exact same. It's 1,000 gold worth of stats, 100% cost efficient, just like recurve bow, just like most other 800 to 1,000 gold items. It's about 100% efficient. So this would give you a total of 50% attack speed. Now that is a high number, but remember, we are doubling down on the attack speed because that's why we're buying this item. It's very clear. And it also opens it up, once again, where you could build this on an AP champion, or you could build this on an AD champion. Right? So you could also build this on, like, maybe a Kaisa who wants to build AP, right? Maybe you want to go, like, Nashor's Tooth plus Ginsu's Rageblade, attack speed Kaisa with AP. Or Kog'Maw, you don't care about the AD if you're playing Kog'Maw or whatever, you just want the attack speed. So I think it's much more clear in its purpose. And then you have plus 15 on hit. Okay, same thing as recurve bow. You have unique 10% movement speed, so you can't just buy a bunch of these items, right, and get the 10% movement speed. You have to buy different items. And then you have the phantom hit. So every third attack triggers on hit twice. So I just want this to be clean. You don't have to charge it up. It's just literally every time you attack, it starts triggering this. You could say every third attack. If that's too strong, just every third attack in general, you could say every third attack against the same target triggers it. So that would be just like Vayne Silver Bolts. They could put a little rings around it or some kind of icon to show when you're going to get your third attack. But maybe we'll just say that. Triggers on hit. That way you can't like charge it up on the minion wave or something, do something goofy like that to make it OP. So once again, this is really clean. It's 2,000 gold. for all of these stats, for the movement speed, attack speed, on hit, whatever, and you're paying 500 gold for the Phantom. I think that's fair. Versus this, like, look at all this math here trying to figure this out. So it's, 85% gold efficient when you have 1 stack and 124% efficient when you get to 6 stacks. But this is like such a goofy style of play, right? You have to either stack it up on a minion wave or stack it up on monsters or whatever. Like, it does show some skill expression, but it's just really clunky. A lot of lower elo players don't use it correctly. So I just think this is just a lot better. It's a lot cleaner, and it's a lot cheaper. So you are losing some power. You are losing, some attack speed up here, right? So if you combine this 48% plus the 25% here, and you are losing the spell pin, and you're losing a lot of junk here, but you're getting a much, much cleaner purpose. Like, it's so much easier to understand this item and why you would get this item, and just to make it feel good. Because when you buy items like this, sometimes it just feels sort of bad. You're like, well, I'm Vayne and I bought this, but I don't have any magic damage, so the dissolve and the ability power kind of feel like crap. But it's just kind of the best I can do right now because my Q tumble bonus damage doesn't crit anymore, so I just have to buy Blade the Run King, and then since I'm not getting crit, I guess I'm getting Gensu's. It's just one of those type of things. So anyways, this feels a lot better. Another item, Runin's Hurricane. So I would just go ahead and clarify this, since it's pretty much the only people that get this are usually, with the exception of maybe Jinx, are people that aren't getting crit, right? And Jinx would probably still like this, even if it doesn't have the crit. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. Hell, maybe Jinx would want to be doing the Blade of the Ruined King plus Hurricane build. Maybe they'd give her a different build instead of just crit if it had this, but very similar thing. Once again, very clear. 50% attack speed, 15 on hit, 10% movement speed, and then you have the Hurricane, which is just the same passive that it is right now. It's just 3 bolts, hit people. I didn't check the ratios or whatever, but it's probably fine. Similar AD ratios and whatever. So you're not going to have AD here. So if you combine this stuff with crit, it's not going to be as good, but it's going to be really good if you combine it with Blade the Ruined King, which is what you usually combine it with because you're getting a lot more attack speed. So it's giving a very clear purpose. Okay, I have Silver Bolts. I have Kog'Maw's W. I have Twitch's Poison. I have these things that I want to stack up, so I'm going to get a lot of attack speed, and I'm going to get stuff that interacts with on hit. I'm going to get Blade the Ruined King, I'm going to get Gensu's, and I'm going to get Runin's Hurricane. And then, because right now it feels weird to get Gensu's on someone like Twitch, because he doesn't use, he doesn't have AP, he doesn't have magic damage, and he can sort of crit with his ult, so you kind of want Infinity Edge plus Hurricane, but then you kind of also want Blade the Ruined King, and it's sort of similar with Ashe, where it's you want Blade the Ruined King and Hurricane, but sometimes you want crit. It just creates all these weird situations. So I just think this is a lot cleaner. It's okay, you got Blade the Ruined King, you want this? Alright, we're going Gensu's and we're going Ruin's Hurricane, we're going to attack fast, and we're going to do a lot of on-hit things. Great. Okay, so that's just an example of clean follow-up items. That's one, and I think that something like AP Bruiser type of champs might also like some follow-up. Although, once again, this could be good on AP champs, this could be something that, maybe Kale might want something like this. I don't know about this one, but it doesn't have AD on it. It doesn't have AP on it. It's just attack speed and on-hit interactions. So there might be a lot of melee champs that would like that. Maybe Jax, would want something like Gensu's a little bit more now. So anyways, it's interesting. You would have quite a bit of movement speed if you got both of these. You'd have 20% movement speed. That might be a little over the line. Maybe you need to nerf it down to 8% or something, but it's pretty good. So you're getting kind of the Zeal movement speed. You're getting the attack speed, but you're not getting crit, because crit just feels really weird with Blade of the Ruined King, because Blade of the Ruined King, sucks with crit. So, anyways, and you would still have the choice of Static Shiv or Phantom Dancer as your Zeal items with crit if you want, and you still have Storm Razor, so you still have a lot of items that you can choose from with crit. You just wouldn't have Hurricane anymore, and once again, the only people who get that with crit would be Jinx and maybe Twitch, although I think Twitch would like the new Hurricane as well, with Blade of the Ruined King. Jinx might, but maybe not. Okay, mid-tier utility items. So these are items that I think are really overlooked right now, and just having something where You have an active that's like a good, clean team fight active that's going to help you out. So we're trying to take away passives. We want like active power. We don't want people to just have auras that just work and are very effective. So we added in, we sort of rebalanced these, and we doubled down on these are like, you want these to counter very specific comps, right? Or very specific situations. So we're going all in on the armor and the magic resist. There are some armor items that go all in, but there are very few magic resist items that are all in. So let's talk about these really quick. And these are team fight oriented items. So we have Frozen Heart, builds out of Glacial Shroud, Chain Vest, and a Cloth Armor. Right now it builds out of Warden's Mail, but I feel like it's really weak that Warden's Mail has an on-hit attack speed slow, but then currently when you complete Frozen Heart, it no longer has that. It just has an aura that's an attack speed slow for a different amount. So it's just kind of a clunky build order. It's also just a ton of mana. You don't need that much mana on modern day items. You don't need 400 mana, 500 mana on items anymore, especially for tanks, because they can just take something like Presence of Mind, which gives them a lot of mana, or they could get 2 of these items, right? They could do Frozen Heart plus Zeke's Convergence or something like that. So I just feel like it's just really clunky, and like flat mana is one of the weakest things in the game for tanks. You need a certain amount early on, but I think any more than like a Sapphire Crystal just feels like you're wasting gold on stats that you could have been, you could have been buying more armor or magic resist or CDR or something else. So Glacial Shroud, Chain Vest, Cloth Armor. So we lowered the cost down to 2,500, just a little bit. It's already a pretty cost efficient item. We took the armor down to 90. We did 10% CDR. Once again, I think 10% should just be the standard. 20% just creates some weird numbers a lot of times, and it's just a strange budget to go for 20%. So I think 10% just clean. Anything that has CDR on it has 10%. 250 mana. That's a very reasonable amount of mana. Once again, that's good, but it's not too much. You don't feel like you're overpaying. And now it's an active. So you activate it, and it slows all attack speed by 25% for 5 seconds with a 700 radius. So this is very similar to a Randuin's, which slows all movement speed. I think it slows movement speed for 2 seconds off of Randuin's, but this would slow attack speed. So it's not always on, which could potentially be OP. Once again, that's hidden power. So you will have moments of weakness where you can't activate this, but it does last longer. It lasts 5 seconds, and I amped up the slow on it to make it much more impactful when it's actually working. So 25% slow instead of just a 15% slow, which Frozen Heart is currently. So currently it's 15%, always works. I would take it at 25% active, only up for 5 seconds. So if it's a quick fight, it'll be up the whole time, but if it's a longer, drawn-out fight, they will eventually get their attack speed back. So this would look, once again, just like a Randuin's, maybe just like an orb or something that explodes, and anyone that gets tagged with it has a debuff. Now 5 seconds, maybe that's too much. Maybe it needs to be 3 seconds. I don't know what the exact number is, but something like that would be cool. It's active, it specifically counters attack speed, and it specifically has a lot of armor with some CDR on it, and it's 2,500 gold. So I think that's a good item. This is not that different from how Frozen Heart is right now. It's just doubling down on what makes it cool, what makes it unique, the attack speed modifier, lowering the cost just a little bit, and then trimming a little bit of the bloat, trimming some of that extra mana, trimming a little bit of the CDR, and trimming a little bit of the armor. So overall, it's going to be a little bit less cost efficient in a lot of cases, but I think that the lower cost and the much more like impactful active would make people consider getting this if they have multiple attack speed champs on their team. Okay, then Locket of the Iron Solari. So this is something that very few people get, and it's just kind of a muddled mess. Like right now, it gives out some armor, a decent chunk of magic resist, and then just has an active shield that's based on the health that you have. So it doesn't have, the thing that makes this awkward is it doesn't have health on it. So the scaling that currently works on it doesn't scale with the stats that are actually on the item. So it doesn't scale with itself. And it also doesn't have CDR on it, which is really weird for like primarily a support item. So like every support item needs 10% CDR, because especially tanks, because a lot of what makes tanks strong are their cooldowns. And especially a lot of tanks have ultimates that start fights with cooldowns, so they really want CDR. And a lot of them really want health too, because a lot of tanks scale with health. But like I said earlier, a lot of items or a lot of this item has been really difficult to balance, is what I'm trying to say in the past. It just had everything on it, right? Where it had, it used to have health, CDR, all kinds of stats on it. It's just a very confusing item. And the thing is, this shield, sometimes you want to get this item just because they have some kind of like burst, but maybe it's not even magic burst. Maybe it's like a Talon or something on your team, and you're just playing a big tank. It's got like 3,000 health on it, and you're like, well, I want something to like stop the burst from the assassin to help my team out, but they have all AD. I don't really want to get magic resist because that's going to feel gross. But I need something to deal with the Talon or the Zed, so I guess I have to get it. It's just like, it feels really bad. So there's a lot of situations where you might want a shield, but you can't get it. So how would I clarify this? I would just make it like, okay, this is the anti-magic item, right? So if they're running a heavy magic damage comp, they're running double AP in their solo lanes, they got a Rumble top and a Ziggs middle or whatever, and they're running a brand support, this is the anti-AP item that's a support sort of team-oriented item that you could get. So I made up an item here, Crystal Mirror, that I think would help. So this is going to be very similar to Glacial Shroud, but for AP. So it's 800 gold, 15 magic resist, 10% CDR, 250 mana. So once again, this is something that, and you could just get this as a support in bot lane, as a tank as well, if you're going against something like a Zyra or a Brand, and it would help out a ton in the early game. Give you the mana, give you the CDR, and give you some magic resist. So I think that would be very good. I also lowered the cost on Glacial Shroud and took off 5 armor. So I lowered it by 100 gold and took off 5 armor. So it does make it slightly more efficient, makes it like 117% efficient instead of like 110 or whatever it is. So it's a little stronger, but it does build into items that overall are going to be like weaker top end items, like the Frozen Heart. So anyways, I think the 800 gold just feels a lot cleaner than 900, and it just sort of parallels what the enchanters are getting with like Forbidden Idol. So I think that's I think it's fair, but you know, we could tweak it. Negatron Cloak, exact same thing. Null Magic Mantle, exact same thing. So you build all this together. 90 magic resist, so it would mirror the 90 armor on Frozen Heart. 10% CDR, 250 mana, so you can get it as an early item and not feel bad, not feel like you're starved for mana. Activate it, reduces all magic damage by 25% for 5 seconds. 700 radius, 1.5 minute CD. So this is the same thing as Frozen Heart, basically, same radius, but instead of affecting enemies, it would, I mean, I guess you could have it tag enemies if you wanted to. So it could debuff them where they deal 25% less magic damage. That's one way to do it. Or it could just tag your allies and give them an extra 25% magic resistance. So it just kind of depends on, I was thinking where you tag your allies with it. If they needed to balance it around where you hit enemies with a curse that debuffs them so they deal 25% less, you could do that. That would be harder because if they have like really long range mages like Xerath or Vel'Koz or something like that, it wouldn't touch them. So just kind of depends on if this item comes in, if it seems like it would be OP or not. If it's too strong, you know, make it to where you have to tag the enemies with it so they can spread out and there's more counterplay. If you feel like it's about right, then you could have it to where it just buffs up your allies. But I like this over the shield for a couple of reasons. Number one, shields in general are just have the potential to be abused and be really OP. I mentioned that earlier because they scale with resistances. So champions that are already tanky, that have a lot of stats, or an enchanter that would, you know, use something like this, it could just get really gross with a lot of plus healing and shielding. And this has happened in the past, and this is why it got nerfed back in, you know, people played it with Redemption and Locket and all that back in Season 7 in the Ardent Sensor meta. It was just giving out just insane shields. It was giving out like 700 or 800 shields when you put this on a Janna that had plus 30% healing and shielding. It was just way too strong. So this gets around it by just adding either a buff or a debuff, right? That's not a shield. It doesn't scale with resistances. It just does exactly what it says it does. 25% extra resistances. Once again, could be for a shorter period of time. Maybe it's 3 seconds instead of 5 seconds. I don't know. But I think this would be a really nice item that you could get. And you would be really weak to AD if you got this, right? So if you get this like big item, you're getting it against magic damage. So this would never cross my mind that I want to get this against a Talon, right? Because it's very clear that you get this against magic. So I think that that's a lot more useful versus the current Locket of the Iron Solari. Just, it's just a muddled mess. It's kind of weird. It gives you a flat. Another option that you could do is you could do a magic damage shield, and that's what I thought of doing, is like similar numbers here, but it could scale with your magic resist, and it gives out a magic shield, kind of like Morgana's Black Shield, but wouldn't reduce CD, or wouldn't reduce CC. So you could do that, but once again, I think that shields are OP, so I would, or have the potential to be OP, so I would just do 25% less damage for magic damage to help out against burst. So this helps out against sustained physical damage because it lowers attack speed, and this helps out against magic damage burst. Now, what about assassins? Burst physical damage. How do you deal with that? AoE burst physical damage. There's not a ton of that out there that's like AoE, but there's Knight's Vow that helps out with that. And there's going to be other items that AD carries can get, which we'll talk about here in just a second. It's going to be a super long video, but whatever. But once again, these are both like team fight, help out your team. So it's not going to help as much against individual assassins, but I think that's okay. Okay, another item that I would like to see come back is Banner of Command in a much more balanced form. So I think I've got a balanced form here that could work for people. I tinkered with this a little bit. It still could be a bit on the strong side. We'll see. But I think this would work. So the problem with old Banner of Command is it gave just way too many free stats. And the minion was just too strong. It worked too well with Baroned up minions. It was like spell immune. It gave too much side lane pressure. But people forgot that this item worked fine for years and years and years. It was fine. It was really the Baron buff plus the spell resistance and all the extra damage and crap that it got, which just made it too strong. But sorry, I'm just going to pull it up here real quick just so I can show you what its final iteration was. I think it's going to show you the most recent one. Yeah, so its stats are too good for what it does. So it was only 2,200 gold, and it gave you 60 armor and 30 magic resist. So the problem was, and it had Point Runner, which was 20% extra movement speed around towers. The problem was, this was just way too strong. Like, you got a bunch of really good resistances, and you got a really good active. So if you look at the gold efficiency, it was already 96% gold efficient. When you're near a turret, it was 132%. And it created, like, a super minion. Or not like a super minion, but a minion that was way too strong. So what I would do is dial back the stats, make sure that it's not that tanky. You're making some real sacrifices to buy this item. You're not going to have these powerful teamfight items. You're not going to have Frozen Heart. You're not going to have Locket. You're not going to have personal tankiness. You're not going to have a high damage item. It's strictly for people who want side lane pressure or who want to split push, that are going to be running around trying to not fight team fights a lot of the time. So you have to be careful with items like this, with like Udyr and Singed and things like that. But I have a collection of stats that I think will make this like reasonable, especially for supports who might want to get this. Okay, so what do we got? Kindle Gem, Aether Wisp, Sapphire. So 30 AP, so a little bit of AP. 10% CDR, because I like CDR on any sort of support items. 10% is good. Movement speed. That's a very like good stat, because you're going to want to go put this down and probably get back with your team or rotate and go somewhere else. So you have some okay stats with it. 200 HP and 250 mana. So a little bit of stats. A little bit, right? But it has no armor, no magic resist, just a couple of generic stats to go with it that work well with the components. So the mana, you can get it early, first or second item. If you want to get a mana item, that could be good. So you could combine this with one of the teamfight items. You could get something like, if they're running all AD, you could do like Frozen Heart into Banner of Command, for example. And then, because maybe you don't need the magic resist, so you could get something that doesn't have the resistances on it. You could get this with Singed. Singed does do very well with AP, but you're going to be really squishy if you have that, because once again, you don't have resistances. And I would just make it a super minion. That's it. It's that simple. It's just a super minion. It doesn't have crazy magic resist. It doesn't do like 40% reduced damage from enemy champions or 100% bonus damage. It's just straight up, it's a super minion. That's it. That's what Promote used to be way back in the day. That's it. It's a super minion, and you get the gold for minions that it kills, or if it kills a tower, you get credit for it. all of that. But that's it. It's just a super minion that you put in a lane, and you have to put it on a cannon minion. So I think that that's fair. Now, it does apply pressure inside lanes, but once again, you're giving up a lot, right? You're going to be squishy. You are not going to have other really good teamfight items. If you get this as an enchanter, you're not going to have Ardent Censer. You're not going to have Redemption. Or as a tank, you're not going to have Frozen Heart. You're not going to have Locket. You're not going to have Knight's Vow. You're not going to have Zeke's. So I think it's a real big opportunity cost, but it could be very strong in certain situations. Maybe you don't have a split pusher on your team. You want a team fight, but you need side lane pressure, right? Or maybe you want to double down on your split push. Maybe you are a Singed and you're okay with being a little squishier, and so you run this instead. Or maybe, Udyr. You're not going to get a lot out of the AP as Udyr, but maybe that's okay with you as long as you have this active. So I think that that's a clean way to do it. You could also do like ZZ Rot Portal, which is similar. Basically, like Banner is much more long range historically than ZZ Rot Portal, and you see it coming from a long ways away. Because that's really easy to kind of stack up waves with Banner as well. ZZ Rot could work fine too, but that's a little bit harder to balance because it shoots out a bunch of little minions over time, and people have to attack it to take it down. So if they don't go deal with it, it can really start pressuring hard. But I would be fine with ZZ Rot coming back too, similar to this. Once again, knock out all the tankiness and just say, hey, if you want that active, you're paying big for it. So you're paying 500 gold for the active. So that's a lot. That's 20% of the value of the item. So the item's 80% efficient without the active. So once again, that's a lot weaker than this one, which was 96% if you're not near a turret and 132% if you're near. So I think that's a fair way to do it. And the minion itself will be a lot weaker. So I think it's really cool to have macro items in the game with teamfight items, so it's not always obvious, like, hey, I just want the best teamfight items. So I think this would be fine. I would like to see, more diversity with items. And then the other one, Leandri's Torment. So I would turn this into a utility item down here, like I'm saying, kind of a mid-range utility item. And how would I do that? Well, I would do Fiendish Codex, so 800, and I know we got to speed this up a little bit more, because I definitely want to keep it under 2 hours. But I would do Fiendish Codex, and Oblivion Orb, and I would change Oblivion Orb to be 20 AP and 10% spell pen. And no more Grievous Wounds. There's something else that's going to be Grievous Wounds, which we'll talk about. So this gives it a much more clear purpose. Like, it's a nice utility item, 10% CDR, just like Deathcap, because there are some mages, once again, that would really like the CDR, and CDR is very lacking on AP items, except for Ludens and GLP, but those are heavy mana items. There are champions that don't need as much mana. Brand, Zyra, even Vel'Koz. Or once again, you could do something like Mana Flow Band or Presence of Mind to get your mana. So I don't think that all of the CDR on AP items should be locked behind heavy mana items. I think that's poor design. So you're going to be able to get 10% CDR here. Unique, 10% Spell Pen. I think, once again, this is a lot cleaner. It's a lot nicer than Madness, which is currently every 1 second that you're in combat, it does 2%. You do 2% increased damage. Because I think something like Leandri's is very good on poke champions too. Or I think it should be an item that's available to poke champions. So stuff like Vel'Koz, stuff like Xerath. They might want a Leandri's because now every time you hit somebody, you do a little bit of extra burn damage. I think that's cool. I think that's nice. Then you can get your Ludens and you can get Leandri's and kind of double down on your poke, right? You've got the little burst off of Ludens and then you have the poke damage off of Leandri's. I think that's a cool play pattern, potentially. So 10% Spell Pen is just cleaner. Gives you more options for Spell Pen. You saw there was something else I had up here that also had 10% pen on it as well. I think that should be on more items than just like your designated Spell Pen item, your Void Staff or whatever, right? I think Flat Pen is really toxic though, so I did not want to put Flat Pen back on this. I think that just it forces everybody to get Flat Pen. Whatever item it's on historically for like the last 5 years or something, pretty much everybody gets Flat Pen. There are some that do like Proto Belt plus Zanyas, but a lot of people just do Sork Boots, Oblivion Orb, because they just got to have the Flat Pen. So I would just go more towards percentage pen, because I think that that's better. It scales better, and it's just the power spike is not overwhelming off of 2 items. So anyways, 10% spell pen, and then 1% max HP per second doubled versus impaired. So the same thing, over 3 seconds, 1%. I think it's currently 1.5%, and then that gets doubled. It might be a little bit less than that, but I think 1% per second. So if you hit somebody, it ends up being 3% max health. It might also be current health. I feel like it's max, though. Let me click on it. Three seconds for a total of 4.5 of the target's max health, bonus magic damage. And then it's increased to 7.5%. So it's not even a clean double anymore. It's like 1.5%, and then it goes up by 70% or something. I don't know. So just make it clean. Make it 1%. So that's a total of 3%, doubled to 6%. So what are you losing here? You're losing Madness, which is stacks up to 10%, but now it's a much more clean. You just get a flat 10% spell pin. You don't have to stay in combat. It does work with poke champions. You're getting 10% CDR, which is nice. You are losing 25 ability power, and you're losing 300 health. It doesn't need health on it. Why do you need health on this? This is a mage item, right? Like, I know there are champs that like the health, but just cut the health off of it. If you want health, go get a health item. You know, go get Rod of the Ages. Go get Rylai's. Rylai's should be a designated health item if you want that. But just cut some of this fat. Don't make it a jack of all trades. Don't make it have, you know, some tankiness to it, some like really good burst damage, some really good sustained damage with Torment, some really good damage if you have poke, especially poke with some kind of CC on it. You know, it's just bloated. There's just way too much stuff on that. Just make it clean. Say, hey, look, this is a damage over time item that works with poke or sustained damage. This is what you would want to get. 2,500 gold, good utility item. Not as hard hitting as Death Cap. It's got half the AP on it, but it's really good utility, especially against tanks, and you can get it faster in your curve. So I think that's a really good item. So that makes it much more in line with something like Proto Belt versus something like Death Cap or Illudens, which I think is a healthy place for it to be. And that would make it a lot more accessible for supports too. So now it wouldn't feel as bad with Zyra or Brand if you're trying to build this item. Because all of these have cheap components. Once again, you're not waiting on a Blasting Wand, right? You can just get Amp Tome into Oblivion Orb, or you can do, you know, Amp Tome into Fiendish Codex. So it's just a lot cleaner. And you're paying a lot for this passive. You're paying 700 gold, so it's still going to be very expensive. Just like right here, you're paying about 700 gold to get it. Currently, you'd pay 700 here as well. Okay, situational components. So these are the last ones that I'll talk about for the last few minutes, and these are kind of the most experimental, but this would be kind of taking it almost to the extreme of like very low stat items that have really good utility on them. And this is just trying to say, look, if you want to get something early on, like to counter a certain type of champion, if you want to get Grievous Wounds, or if you want to get Quicksilver Sash, this is going to double down on that playstyle and give you a really unique identity. So you're not just sitting there with Quicksilver Sash, feeling bad, feeling like you're getting taxed, like you can't ever complete that item, or like with Executioner's Calling, just feeling like you can't ever complete that item, like you're already behind because now you can't get your core build. Also, if you do have to get those items, because your core build is cheaper, now that your Infinity Edge is 3,000 instead of 3,400, if you do have to get a Quicksilver Sash and you do want to sit on it, it's okay. It doesn't feel like all is lost just because they picked a Soraka. And you have to get Executioners. So I think this would feel a lot nicer. You notice a lot of this is centered around AD carry and making AD carry feel better, because that role, I think most people agree, it basically sucks. Unless you are duo queued with like a professional support or something, that's like one of the worst roles in solo queue, because it's the most team dependent. I think it's even more team dependent than support, honestly, a lot of times, because you're so weak early game. You require so much gold. You just have virtually no utility items, and you can't do anything if you're really far behind, because a lot of them just don't have any utility in their kits. Some of them do, like Ashe with her arrow, but anyways, so that's why a lot of this is focused on like clarifying and making the AD carry role feel a little bit better. But there's a little something for everybody. And obviously, this is just a sample, right? This is almost going on 2 hours as a video. I could go all day with like adding new items, like revamping stuff, but these are just some of the most glaring things that I think could be optimized. Okay, so final stretch here. So these are 2,000 gold items. This is very similar to a support item, but it's very situational. You would not want to rush this every game. They are, by and large, going to be pretty inefficient and pretty bad if you aren't making very good use of the things that they have to offer. Okay. So first up, Mortal Reminder. I want to reimagine and rework this into just a much cheaper item that's going to give you less AD. It's going to give you the armor pen, and it's going to give you the grievous wounds. So if we look at like Mortal Reminder right now, and you can get it much faster. So you get all of that much faster, but it's a little bit less powerful when you complete it. So if we look at Mortal Reminder right now, it's kind of a confusing item because it's 2,800 gold, which is super expensive. It has 45 attack damage on it. So it's like, it has like kind of big hitting attack, sort of big hitting attack damage, but it also has executioners on it for 3 seconds, which is more than, or for 5 seconds, which is more than the 3 seconds on executioners. And it's got 25% pen, which is good, but ultimately it's a very, very gold inefficient item. It's only 56% gold efficient. So it's just really, really bad to get this item. Unless they have, like, everything you're hitting, it only gets to 100% efficiency at 122 armor. So it's just way, way too much for what it is. So, like, yes, it's good at chopping down tanks, but what if you just want executioners and they don't have a lot of tanks? What if it's Soraka with a bunch of squishies on the enemy team? It's like, okay, you get executioners and you just never build this item because it's trash. Right? So it just feels really awkward to build this in a lot of situations. So I would just, kind of like what I'm doing with the rest of this stuff, clarify its purpose. Why are you getting this? Well, you're getting it for grievous wounds, and you're also getting it for some armor pen because you want to be able to deal with tanks that also heal, because that's very common. Tanks, you know, Mundo with Spirit Visage and Conquer or something like that, right? Or Red Cane or whatever. So I would amp up grievous wounds a little bit because I do think that healers are a bit on the strong side. And I think that like Spirit Visage is strong, Conquer, like there's just way too much healing in the game right now. So I would make grievous wounds 50% for 3 seconds, so a little bit stronger. And I'd go with 30 AD, 20% armor pen. So we're losing 15 attack damage, and we're losing 5% armor pen. But you complete it at 2,000 gold. And then executioners, I would make it 10 AD. So the grievous wounds is a little bit more expensive. It's 10 AD plus, so that's about 350 gold, and you're paying 650 for executioners. So it's more expensive if you just want the anti-healing, but if you get it, then it's 50%, right? Or you could even make like normal executioners, the cheap one. You could make it less. You could make it like 30% reduced, and then you could make the completed Mortal Reminder 50%, just to give you a reason to complete it. And then Last Whisper to be 10% armor pen and 10 AD, but also be cheaper. So, and then you get a nice little completion bonus. You get 10% extra armor pen and 30 AD. So there's a reason to complete it now. It's not just sit on executioners. Now you can feel good like you're getting an efficient item if you actually complete it. So you wouldn't want to do it every game. It doesn't have attack speed on it, doesn't have crit, doesn't have on hit. It's definitely going to sidetrack you, but it's not like all is lost. You're still getting a pretty good bargain if you complete this, if that's what you want. If you want the armor pin, if you want the grievous wounds for later. So it makes grievous wounds a little bit tougher to get on your first back. So it doesn't completely like dumpster Soraka in the laning phase potentially, but it makes it feel a lot better in the mid to late game if you get that item. So I think that's a good choice. Another grievous wound item I would add would be Morellonomicon. So I would re-envision this item to be one of these cheaper type of items. And I would, once again, I just want to get rid of the flat pen. Now, maybe they could bring back another like single flat pen item, or maybe they could make spell pen kind of like lethality and scale over time. I don't know. But I just think that flat pen is really toxic in general. On mages, it just gives them... It just forces them to buy it. They have to buy flat pin, as I said over and over again. Like, you have to get Sork boots plus whatever the flat pin item is, it feels like, on a lot of mages, or you're just going to lose in the mid game. But anyways, I created an item, Infernal Skull. So this is basically just the same thing as Executioners, but it's just a cheap, anti-healing item. So 1,000 gold, 20 AP plus Grievous Wounds. So that's basically the same budget, or very similar budget to Executioners. So you can get that early if you need to deal with some healing. You know, maybe in the bot lane you're playing Zyra, or maybe you're playing Brand or Vel'Koz or something. They have a Soraka, they have a Sona, they have a Yuumi or whatever. You can just get this Infernal Skull, 1,000 gold, and then build something else with your kit if you want to. So you can get it early, hold on to it, or you can get Oblivion Orb. So Oblivion Orb is going to be 28, only 1,000 gold, 20 AP, 10% pin. If you complete the item, then you're going to get 40 AP, 20% spell pin, and then you're going to get the reduced healing. So once again, it's going to feel like pretty good once you get this item. Yes, you're going to be off track a little bit. So it doesn't have pin on it. It doesn't have mana on it. Doesn't have CDR on it. Doesn't have cool actives like Zanya's or Proto Belt. So you're losing out on some stuff. There's a real opportunity cost. But if you do want some spell pin and you do want to shut down Grievous Wounds, it could potentially be an item for you. So, you know, it is kind of a mix. It's not full-on Void Staff. It's not going to have the same... If you want the really heavy-hitting, heavy AP, heavy pin, you can still get Void Staff. And you can combine this with Void Staff if you want. So you might actually be able to cut through the tanks in the late game. If you want to go for that. If you want to, you know... It's going to stack multiplicatively, so... you know, it'd be an option, though. If you want to go for a heavy pin build, if they're stacking a bunch of magic resist and you want to go for a bunch of pin, that would be an option. But I think that's just cool. You know, once again, gives you something early you can buy, and then you can hold on to it, or you have a choice. If you want to go ahead and complete it, it turns into a reasonable item that doesn't just totally suck. Because completing Morellonomicon just feels bad. Right now, you want the Oblivion Orb because you have to have flat pin because it's OP. But then after that, it's like, well... I kind of want Grievous Wounds, but do I really want to pay 3,100 gold? It's like, yeah, it's technically efficient. You know, the current Morellonomicon gives you like about 100% gold efficiency to complete it, but it feels bad. It feels like you're priced into it when you'd much rather just go Oblivion Orb into like Leandri's or Oblivion Orb into, you know, just some other type of item. Usually it's either Leandri's or Void Staff if it's Brand Zyra or some other high flat damage mage. So it just feels bad to complete Morellonomicon right now, but if you already have the orb, you're kind of priced into it a lot of times. So, and then you just have Grievous Wounds. Sometimes you don't even need Grievous Wounds, but it's just like, I've already paid 1,600 towards this item. The most efficient thing I can do with my money is, buy the rest of it. What is it, Rory?
My house.
Your house? Okay. Hold on. There you go. Okay, go on in there.
Okay. Cozy.
It's cozy, isn't it? So yeah, I think that would be good. Okay, and then the final item I'll leave you with here, and we really got to go because I do not want to see a 2 on this video for 2 hours. I made this one up, but this is something that you could build out of Quicksilver Sash, and I think it would work with a lot of items. It's perfect for you?
Yeah, I could be inside.
Okay, go on in then.
This is.
I
will go in.
Okay, go on in.
Cozy.
It's cozy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the door.
Okay, that's the door. So I call it Starlight Blessings. You could call it some different stuff as well. But basically what it is you can build this out of Quicksilver Sash, and it's like a blend of Death's Dance and Quicksilver Sash. It's like really low on stats, but really high on utility. So this would be good at protecting you from assassins if you're a squishy champ, and it doesn't even just have to be ADCs anymore. You could get this as any champ. Which I think is really nice. If you're a squishy support, you're like a Janna or something, or... Oh, Rory's sleeping. If you're like a Janna, you're tired of getting assassinated, or just like chain CC'd, or, you know, you're an ADC, or maybe you're even a mage. Maybe you're a Zoe or something, and you're tired of getting chain CC'd, but you don't want to buy Hourglass. You could do this. Now, you're giving up a lot of offense. This has no offense on it whatsoever. It's strictly defensive. So you are losing a lot of damage if you get this. But... maybe that's what you need to do in a game. So it's kind of like an old school GA sort of thing where you're just sort of like really conceding a ton of damage to have utility. But anyways, it's Quicksilver Sash. So I changed Quicksilver to be 1,000 gold. And it doesn't give you any magic resist on it anymore. It just gives you cleanse, but it also gives you 20% movement speed when you cleanse. And it's on a 1.5 minute cooldown. So you get a nice little movement speed burst. Maybe it should be 2 seconds. I don't know. Kind of like a Mikhail's. But you're paying a lot of gold. Once again, no stats on it. So I don't know what it would build out of. Maybe it's just flat out 1,000 gold and kind of violates my 800 gold rule. I don't know. But that's what I would like. So just forget the stats. You're just paying strictly for the active there. And then I would bring back Will of the Ancients as an item. Just kind of in name only. But it would have a couple of abilities here. So... it basically for 100 gold gives you the Death's Dance passive, which is, and obviously you would use this item to build into Death's Dance instead of Aegis of the Legion probably. I didn't really rejigger Death's Dance, but I like the passive on it, and I think that it could be good on something like Quicksilver Sash. So it basically, all of the damage that you do heals you for 15%. So whether it's true damage, physical damage, magic damage, whatever, it heals you for 15%. And it delays all of the damage to you for 3 seconds, and it shows up as a dot over time, which does true damage. And I would just create 2 400 gold items. One would give you 10% spell vamp for 400 gold, and one would give you 10% lifesteal for 400 gold. That has no stats on it, no AD, no AP, nothing. So maybe that's a little on the strong side, especially the spell vamp for mages. Maybe that'd have to be rejiggered, but I like the idea of it. Something that combines Quicksilver Sash with Death's Dance for like the supreme defensive item, but has almost no stats, just like 200 health for a little bit, just for a reason to complete it. But other than that, nothing. Anyways, that's going to be it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.